So, I mean, FAA regulations, how would you compare those with the current drone regulations in the US? Obviously, it's different here, but how would you compare the FAA regulations, with the drone regulations in the US?
Can I
Yeah, that's
just
a
kind
great
of
question.
And can I just
Oh,
add
go
to
on.
that? I
Yeah.
think it's really interesting, Tana. It will be really, really great to hear your perspective because, as you mentioned, you've got the commercial airline background, and now you're running essentially a franchise in the drone services business, which obviously are those two worlds have a lot of overlap. But it's really interesting to hear your perspective on how you find the regulatory environment for those two things, and what are your thoughts on what's working well today, and what could be done better.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's something that really from the outset we were paying a lot of attention to because of the fact that so many of us were coming from a professional aviation background and we understood the transferability of those skill sets. And we knew, okay, we understand performance and meteorology and interfacing with the FAA and that regulatory environment. And the more that I looked at it, the more that I saw this new and emerging, drone space that was kind of like the Wild West in the US at least, right? It was like everybody was doing whatever they wanted to do. There weren't really a ton of regulations. That framework was kind of slow to evolve. So that's where we saw an opportunity, right? We'll take our experience and the expectations that we know that the FAA has from a professional aviation standpoint, and then build that into our business model and enable our franchisees to kind of work to that and then exceed that kind of expectation, I think, because in our mind, it's just an inevitability, right? It's just a matter of time before the FAA catches up to that level of kind of like the regulatory body of say the airline world, like the Part 121 world, and then really and makes that and enforces that within the Part 107 world, right? So we just think that that's going to be something that's just, like I said, this is inevitable, and I think you're already starting to see that, right? There's just a few years back, the Part 107 regulations came out, and it was like, oh wow, okay, and now we're talking type certification and airworthiness
Yeah.
requirements of these different drone platforms, and that's in our mind is it almost mirrors the regulatory framework from the Part 121 world from decades and decades back, right? So that's where we think that it's really probably going to be follow a very similar trajectory, I think, going forward, and I think you're already starting to see that. So obviously there's technical hurdles and there's regulatory hurdles. There's also cultural hurdles as well that we talk about a lot. Some people are still like, what are these drones? How is this working? What are they doing over my house? So it
Yeah.
always kind of has a tendency to get people a little spun up. But I think in large part there's going to be a lot of overlap. It'll follow a very similar path as kind of the airline regulatory framework. So yeah, I think it's pretty fascinating, and so we're trying to get ahead of that, right? And we're trying to standardize our workflows and focus on safety and risk analysis and assessments and having common manuals and systems in place so that all of our folks are already operating at that level when the time does come.